Is the music person here? No music. Okay. Okay, well, seeing that we're running a little bit behind schedule already, I guess we should just begin. I would like to start this morning by, first of all, introducing myself. I'm Nora Bateson. I'm a member of the Club of Rome, and I am your chosen facilitator today to wind us through what I think will be a very interesting collection of inputs and hopefully conversations. One thing that I would like to see happen in addition to yesterday's beautiful session is to bring you more into the day and to generate more conversation, a little bit less of a lecture series. So I hope that's okay with you and that that sounds good. I think we got started yesterday with just a fabulous grouping of inputs that have inspired us, frustrated us, depressed us, given us all kinds of intellectual fodder and food to chew on, and at the same time, I know once or twice we may have thought, but I already knew that. What am I here for? What are we here for? And I think that is still the question, and it should continue to be the question. How can we bring these ideas, these people, all of this incredible work that exists in this room toward the possibility of creating systems change? That's really my focus. I'm interested in how complex systems change. How do they learn? What makes them shift? How is it that the contextual processes interact with the individual elements of those processes to create new patterns, living patterns, changing patterns? For me, this is a question of how do we get unstuck? And I think that's what I'm interested in. So if there's a tilt toward that question today, you might know why. This morning, I don't want to talk very much because I'd like us to just dive right in, being that we're already running behind and I promised you conversation, and in the first session, I don't know that we're going to have any because we're already 20 minutes behind. Our first session this morning is about the reflections, insights, and actions, and honoring this 50th anniversary of the Club of Rome. I'm 52. I'm 50 also, not 52. So I kind of feel like 50 is young. It's okay, we're just getting started, you know? It's, there's a lot of work to do. And I, for one, am not going to shy away from that work, recognizing that the work is hard, the intellectual work is rigorous, and the emotional, conceptual processes are disorienting. And that's okay. That's what we're in for. So looking backward, we have this wonderful treat of having Wouter van Dieren give us a little, a little journey. Take us on a little journey, Wouter.
This is Beethoven, and the poetry is by a contemporary poet of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And it says, it's a story, it's appraisal of the creation, of the Creator. And it's beautiful, as you have seen, and it's my homeland. That's where I have my house, that's where my family comes from. It's a Frisian island. The Frisians were a tribe 2,000 years ago who were considered by Plinius the Elder from Rome as the most primitive people he had ever encountered. That was us. We survived, nevertheless, in a land that almost did not exist. As you know, God created the earth, but he did forget the Netherlands. That's why we've done it ourselves, and 65% of our country is below sea level. And you heard yesterday people talking about Bangladesh, but we are the first. And this island will disappear by the year 2135. If we don't take measures. Then the people say the Dutch have their dikes, but that's not the only solution. But that's not the story I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, where is the... I'm going to tell you the story of Machiavelli 2.0. Chapter 1 till 10 from Il Principio, the principles of deceit, cheat, conviction, and all that. How limited growth became a world success. Why was that? We all know the names of the original people who got together, and I will say no more about it because it's been done by Günther and all the others at the same time. But the list will come back because the list indicates a great secret. There's a great secret behind it. They came together because Alexander King in the World Future Society had done a great job before. And the job was about exponentiality, something most people did not understand. What is exponentiality? And therefore, and he used these figures, which he told me when I interviewed. I was science editor at the time with Dutch television, and I was making films about the environment, where the board of Dutch television said the environment is not an important subject. The public will be bored with it. I said, no, it's important. The public will like it. And in the end, it turned out, indeed, that the public was highly aware of the subject. Alexander King told me when I interviewed him in Paris in the late 1970s, you have to realize that these are the figures. I'm not going to quote, you can read everything. Those are the figures that he showed to me. So there is no need whatsoever to make a model, because it is so obvious. And he said to me, but nevertheless, I will send you, if you really want an interview, to a group of people whom I have more or less hired together with some friends in MIT. And that's what I did. And I spent 2 days with Dennis and Donella and the System Dynamics group. They were much larger than the 4 of them who finally became world famous, but it was astounding. And I had the immediate feeling they have dynamite in their hands, which they could not believe. Wouter, we are going for a solid publication. Alexander wants that, and Aurelia wants that. And so it's a solid and normal publication by the mid of next year. So we hope it will be well read. I said, no, it's dynamite. I'm a media man. I know what the public wants, what they like. Keith is a media man in Australia, and both of us were there in the beginning. This is what happened. This is a replica. I could not find the original, but it looked almost like this. I took the copy, I got a few copies, I took them home, and in the end, I spread these copies all over the place, And it looked like that, but it was full of scribblings and fingerprints, and everything was on it. And over there, even the Russian word over there, which means secret, was there. It was there in the beginning. So this thing, this paper was spread around with the media, friends, scientists in Holland, England, and Germany. What I did, I asked for commentary. And I got commentary from all kinds of distinguished people, and the most important were the Philips Physics Lab. The Philips Physics Lab was a #1 laboratory in the whole of the world. And Henry Casimir, the great man who ran the laboratory, a friend of Heisenberg, said, "This is new. Can we run the model on our computer?" We did run the model on some computers. Believe it or not, they were 32 KB. So it took hours, and we used 2 languages, Fortran and Dynamo, which for me was very difficult, but I was very good in understanding all the feedback loops. That was my part of the story. And why do you do that? Why do you spread it all over, and why do you calculate? Because you want to minimize the negative reactions at the day of the launch. There had to be a D-Day. There had to be. And the big question was, could we control the dates of D-Day? Aurelio said to me, please don't publish it yet, because we're planning all the translations to appear at the same time. And I said, I realize that. But you also have to realize that media work is a different story, is a different task. And so gradually something came into being, which is best expressed by the German word Rausch. A Rausch is what's happening. Have you heard this one? Are you already engaged? Don't you have a copy? I have a copy, and I'm an important professor, and I'm an important minister, and I don't have a copy yet, but I should have a copy as well. Have you seen it? And it's totally secret, and there is something in it that is really. So that's soft noise, but everything was printed with confidential, not for publication. It's not yet ready, so don't say anything, because you can't criticize it because it's not yet ready. And then Willem Oltmans was mentioned by Günther yesterday. He tracked the Club of Rome, and I stayed close to the science group. But then, of course, this is what happened. Paciei. Okay, Rome. Why Rome? What is in Rome? The Vatican. It's no wonder that we are here today. This confirms it. And then a few multinationals. Aha, those were the days when the counterculture of the 60s rose to power. And the multinationals, of course, were the culprits of everything evil in the world. So there were 3 multinationals, the Vatican, and Carroll Wilson, the US, and the Soviet Union. The combination was unheard of at the time. Why should the Americans and the Russians work together? The CIA and the KGB. Yes. And all over the place, these rumors started to spread, which was splendid, of course. This is Machiavelli, chapter 7. What is their secret agenda? And of course, this is what came out about a computer. The computer, the word hell I should not use here in these places, but what the hell is a computer? We think that a computer was well known at the time, but it was not. The Sarah computer which we used was an enormous box, much larger than this piano. And of course, it was the industrial dynamics of Forrester's work was used by the Pentagon. And that's where it originated, as far as I read from his first book. But you cannot predict the future. So why do they want to predict the future? As Jürgen says yesterday, it was not about predicting the future. But of course, that's what everybody believed. And the belief and the image is more important than the reality. So why do they want to predict the future? Why do they want to warn us? And why is it so apocalyptic? Why? Isn't there something like progress? Isn't progress normal? They are in a program to undermine growth. And why do they want that? Then, autumn, October 1971, the #1 newspaper in the country, I gave them permission to launch it. And they had a big headline, Apocalypse on Credit. The next day followed by the most prominent weekly, and within days all over Europe. There was no internet, but for reasons unknown to me, the system was such, Keith, you would know how it worked, all over the world, within days, the same message was on. Apocalypse, a conspiracy, absolutely a conspiracy of great powers in the world. Why would they do that? Hey, what's happening? I show you the first interview Dennis ever gave on television. The very first interview. Just 1 minute. Yeah? Where is it?
Exponential growth technically is any process which doubles in a
I continue until he is there. Is that all right with you?
exponential growth technically is any process which doubles in a fixed time period, 1, 2, 4, 8, and so forth. The intuitive example I like to use to illustrate exponential growth is that of a shop.
They're working on it. Yeah. It begins with a story about the king of Persia. A checkmaster tells him that here is a chess game. Does the king of Persia want the chess game to be introduced into his country? And then they play a game of chess, and the king likes it so much that he says to the checkmaster, "What do you want as a reward for introducing us to this beautiful game?" And the chess master said, 1 grain on the first block, 2 on the next, 4 on the next, and by the end of the blocks, the full country, the grain, the wheat was exhausted. And that's what it all starts with. What do we do?
Technically is any process which doubles in a fixed time period, 1, 2, 4, 8, and so forth. The intuitive example I like to use to illustrate exponential growth is that of a shopkeeper who hired a new clerk. He asked the clerk how much he would like to be paid for the coming month. The clerk said that he'd like a penny the first day, 2 pennies the second day, and so forth. Well, the shopkeeper was delighted. First day he paid a penny. The 10th day he paid $5. The 20th day, however, he had to pay $5,000. And before the month was out, the shopkeeper was bankrupt. That's exponential growth. For population, and it is growing exponentially, is about 32 years now and decreasing. Decreasing because our
Stop it now, because the next week we aired an interview with Jay Forrester, and his famous words were, for the last couple of 100 years, the world has been confronted with growth of everything. Population, production, pollution. This growth is going to stop. The only question is how? By conflict, war, or by sheer governance and intelligence? That was a fantastic statement. A week later, Jürgen Randers called me and said, can I have the footings of the film for use in his work? Perhaps you remember Jürgen, but for me that was a fantastic reaction. Can I have the footings of these first film? Now, the combination, of course, was clear, a conspiracy. And then, of course, in the months to go, hundreds of articles appeared in Dutch Parliament. There was an enormous excitement, so there was all over Europe, in all the parliaments, growth is going to stop, and we're in for big trouble by the mid of next century. And of course, all sorts of schools then emerged. And here is a list of those schools in those days. Interpretations of what this was all about. The first one is, it's an effort to save capitalism. Because, as Marx had said, capitalism will kill in the end itself. There are many economists here in the room, and they all know, of course, Marx. And this is an effort to save capitalism. That was one. This next one is the Third World School. It's to deprive the developed nations from the creation of wealth. That's the next one. And of course, the Democratic School says, this is a pledge for a strong man. And this is the eternal effort of those in power. And the strong man, of course, has to take over. And that's something you hear all the time. Still today, the problems we are facing are too large to comply with in a democratic system. Technocratic school. So there's one solution, more technology, more growth, because in the end we can pay everything with the results of more growth. This is a story that I remember that Ernst is telling almost every day. They want more growth in order to find the solutions. The futurology school, progress is a normal thing. That is the yes, Carlos, that's how it goes. Progress is normal, is the way things are. It's like Winnie the Pooh, huh? The way things are. And of course, the alien school, it's always the other. We are polluting, but over there are people who are polluting more. And in the end, the green school, and that's us. But still, all these schools are surviving. This is chapter 12 of Machiavelli. At the Free University in Amsterdam, we keep track of what happened, articles and all that. I personally gave some 3,000 speeches on the subject. Dennis' record, and I suppose Jürgen is 6,000, 9,000, and we will never stop. We are the descendants of Moses and Noah, so we will turn 900 years, so we have a long time to go to talk about it. And of course, repeated confirmation, studies of all kinds, but also a lot of science crap. Crap news, crap science and all that. It's full of it. How often I have been told that I was a shit and I was a stupid because I believed in the raison d'être of World 3 model and all that's behind it. Although it's a very complicated thing to... the best thing you can do is show the World 3 model. It's an enormous spider web which nobody can understand. And it creates an enormous enigma. And of course, fake news and The Economist in the counterattack. And then the Mitchell Prize was issued, and that was a big event with the Hudson Institute in the attack, and it was the beginning of the Merchants of Doubt, which you all know. That was the beginning, and Ugo Barri will tell us how the Merchants of Doubt regarding limits finally took control. Then the Club of Rome revival, winter 1990, and that, I believe, is something to conclude with. After Gorbachev called 1,000 people in, I think I told something about it yesterday evening at the dinner party, so I will not repeat it, but that was the start. And the fact that Gorbachev came into the Club of Rome and called for world peace was a major step as a reaction, as a result of the Club of Rome. So let's not complain. I will not handle this, but only will point you at this one. I've told this story time and again. It is the Bruegel 500 years ago painted the Tower of Babel, and in that you will find the whole story of the limits to growth. That everything is in it. Here you can read it very, very fastly, and it's all about resources. If after 100 years the tower still cannot be completed, there must be something wrong in the model. And of course, we all know why it was, because all the resources nearby were depleted, and everything was used for maintenance and for the long distances between the quarries and the place where everything had to be constructed. But look at this one. Here on the left is the king, and there is someone on the floor pledging, "Please, Your Majesty, listen to me. I'm from Rome. And I know the answer." But the king said, "I understand, but I've just been told that I should a famous Scottish clan to advise me. They called McKinsey." And of course, their advice was to fire half of the labor force and to privatize. So much has happened. We climbed an enormous mountain. The next mountain is higher. We will climb that too. And why do we climb that too? Because women have taken over the presidency of the Club of Rome. Did you know how many women were candidates? One of the after said, "Me too." I want to be... I want to be in the ExCom. I want to take charge. But it's great that women take over now, because Machiavelli is over, and now is the time of the female power. Thank you very much. Amanta.
Thank you, Wouter. Ugo, just take over.
Thank you very much. Can I have the first slide, please? And I'm charged with a task very difficult, which is to do better than Wouter. And you heard the history of the Club of Rome in 30 minutes. I'll do better telling you the history of the whole world in 10 minutes. All right, so since we are in Rome, let me start with this image that you can see here. You can imagine almost that there was a time here where tourists did not exist. Can you believe that? And back during the 18th century, people from the north, like you, most of you, they would come to Rome, and they were amazed by these huge ruins, collapsed buildings they would find there. And so that produced a whole stream of art, a kind of paintings, which is an example, this one, by a little-known French painter of the 18th century. But people were really impressed at these kind of things. And they wondered, what happened? How is it that this big town, a long time ago, was huge, immense, great empire, and now all ruins? They were thinking the same things we are thinking today. And by the way, 18th century, as you remember, is the time when Edward Gibbon published his Decline and Fall of Rome, which was a little bit an anticipation of what the Club of Rome would do later on, 200 years later. So people were asking the question, what happens to empires? Why do empires grow, become enormous, glorious, powerful, and then down they go? So the Roman Empire was gone, but also later empire, the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, the American Empire. That's still there, but I don't think it will last much longer than the others. So already at the time of the Romans, people were feeling the pressure. But something is going wrong. What is this? And they never found an answer. Because they never had a Club of Rome in Rome at the time of the Roman Empire. Or maybe there was. Sometimes I dreamed that there was a group of intellectuals went to see the emperor, say, "Emperor, we have a computer program." What's a computer program? Well, don't worry about that. The empire is going to fall. Go away, and things like that. Just like Wouter said, probably happened already at the time of Marcus Aurelius. You see his statue in there. But there is a feeling. You read the literature, Latin literature, the 1st century of our era, 2nd century, 3rd century, you have this feeling that something was wrong. They started to perceive there was something, too many people, overpopulation, not enough resources. Tertullian in the 3rd century already noted that. But Seneca, the philosopher, wrote these letters, to his friend Lucilius, and said, well, I noticed something, growth is kind of difficult and slow, but ruin is rapid. And to Seneca goes the merit of having invented system dynamics, I think. He didn't have computers, unfortunately, but he didn't even know the Arabic numerals we use today, but he could not draw Cartesian graph, but he had the feeling. So I took this sentence from Seneca, and I used to define this Seneca effect. Seneca effect is something that is an idea that goes around in the web. Things grow, then they fall, and very often they fall faster than they grow. So, how does it work? Now, generations of historians after Gibbon have been trying to interpret the fall of empires. It's a big task. And typically they say every empire falls for a different reason. Because the barbarians, because of lack of moral fiber, because of not enough money, because of a mad emperor. Yeah, something like that also now, but not. Let's not go into that. We think, with my co-workers, that we found a general explanation for the fall of all empires, including the current one, which doesn't depend on mad emperors, that they may help push things in a certain direction. And we just published 2 days ago our major interpretation of this idea, together with my co-workers, Ilaria and Sarah. They are both here, these two ladies, and you can see them there and there. And if you like to ask them questions about some complicated modeling issue, you can ask them. And the idea is anyway that the work done at the Club of Rome, sponsored by the Club of Rome, the MIT group, and J. Forrester in 1971, is the basis of the growth, peaking, and decline of complex systems. It is the same mechanism that we have been using to describe the future of our civilization that can also describe the path of ancient civilizations. And make it quick, because of course you probably know it already, but essentially what brings down empires is a dynamic effect which we call overshooting or overshoot. Look, I'm sure you all know what is overshoot, but think that back in 1970s, 1960s, it was a revolutionary concept. No one had thought of that it could apply to social systems. It is a great merit of J. Forrester. He was the first who took this concept from engineering and he applied it to social systems. And the same equations that describe some oscillating systems in engineering can be used for social systems. Essentially, overshoot can be gentle, in the sense you oscillate around what we call now a carrying capacity, and you find eventually an equilibrium. If you do not exaggerate, you still have a small collapse, but then you return, and then you go on and on. Eventually, you find a homeostasis of the system. If you exaggerate, now, as you can see there, then you destroy the carrying capacity of the system, and the whole thing crashes down, collapses badly, and you do not recover, not immediately at least. The Roman Empire fell, around the 5th century of our era. It took about 1,000 years for Rome, here around us, to become bigger than it was at the time of the Western Roman Empire. So if you exaggerate with destroying the system, then you do not ever recover. Or you do, but it takes 1,000 years if you're lucky. So the message is simple, and you know it already, but let me repeat it. If you grow too fast, then you crash even faster, which is something that I think Seneca, the philosopher, already had clear in his mind. His idea of the Stoicism is a rather popular philosophy right now because it is a philosophy of hard times. We have to recognize that things are not always good, you are not always lucky, you cannot grow forever. And I think on this, we need to understand it better at several levels. Anyway, if you exaggerate, you crash. So what is that we have to do? We have to slow down. We were already told that by the people who produced the Limits to Growth report back in 1972. Slow down, take all the measures we have been discussing here, take care of the soil, of the resources, of the ecosystem, of the biosystem, everything, and avoid as much as possible the crash, because we are already in overshoot. We have to return. That's unavoidable. And if we do that, if we are careful, we can probably swim all the way to a situation which will not be so bad. But if we continue to push for growth, then we will go to a rather bad situation. And the Seneca cliff is not definitive, it's not the death of everything, but if you are not careful, you might find it a bit painful. So we have tried to do what we can to avoid flying over the cliff and landing nobody knows where. So thank you for your attention and take care.
Thank you, Ugo. So we have to hurry up and slow down. So our next speaker is John Warner from the Institute of Green Chemistry, taking us on a slightly different angle, but toward a similar set of ideas. So I'll be interested to see how you weave this together.
Me too. Hello, my name is John Warner. I'm a new member of the Club of Rome just this year. And where everyone's giving their age, I'm 56, so I'm still kind of young, I hope. We hear today and yesterday, there's so much knowledge, there's so much that we know, there's so much information about things happening in the climate. You open up the newspaper, you look on the internet, and you hear about these red dyes that cause cancer, that you hear about plastics that cause birth defects and accumulating in the ocean. We have so much knowledge, and yet we still have more problems. Tomorrow, there'll be a new product that contributes to global climate change. There'll be a new product that is toxic. There will be a new product. Why is it that we continue to make these hazardous materials? Everyone, I feel oftentimes we consider, is this toxic? Is this dangerous? Is this bad? Is this dangerous? Is this scary? And we're not asking the most important question. Why would a chemist invent a technology today with all this knowledge that has negative impact on human health and the environment? I am a chemist, okay? I am an inventor. And I've been looking at why it is that we're in the situation that we're in. And the way I explain it is the following. If we look at the history of chemistry, now, it's important to realize that when we look at a company that is designing a product, okay, you have product designers, you have product engineers, and they want to make a new product. They look over the world and they find what is available to them to make the product. But they are restricted to the materials that are available to them. So if a company or a group of people want to make a sustainable product, and they take these materials over here and these materials over here, if the fundamental building blocks are not sustainable, there is no way that we can create a policy, we can create some kind of technology to make it sustainable. And so I would argue that the missing component here is the chemists who invent the materials. If the materials are not sustainable, you can't have a circular economy. So if we have a circular economy where we want to have the materials kept into a loop, if we imagine the intellectual ecology, where does invention fit in a closed system? How does some new idea, a new invention happen? It's a really interesting problem that we have. And so I see it as, in this room, there are not many chemists, there are not many inventors. I go to circular economy conferences, I go to sustainability conferences, and oftentimes, I'm the only chemist in the room. Now, why? This is what I believe. I am not a historian, I don't have deep knowledge of history, but my perception is the following. Back 220, 230 years ago was the birth of modern chemistry. Lavoisier and many other people started to understand that the universe could be explained by atoms and molecules. And they constructed all the mechanisms and all the ways to explain and interpret the world around them. And it was a beautiful thing to try to understand why things happened the way they happened. And 100 years into chemistry, in the late 1800s, William Perkins was studying coal tar, and he found that a pink fluid came out of it. Then he realized that if he isolated this, it dyed fabrics, and he could sell it. And all of a sudden, chemistry had a path change, and there became a new field of chemistry called industrial chemistry. And industrial chemistry not only understood things, but found ways of making things and building things. And the economy of the world exploded because we started making this and making this. And the people studying things started going this direction, and the people making things started going this direction. And the mechanisms of the economy supported the people making new materials. And we did a lot of good things. We cured sick people, we started to feed the hungry, we clothed people, we were doing amazing things, and the money just kept coming in. And these people that were studying the world, well, they had some government funding, they had some NGOs, and which became more powerful. And at some point, just like the Tower of Babel, these people began to speak a different language. They no longer spoke the same language. And so the people here that started to learn about mechanisms of cancer, mechanisms of birth defects, mechanisms of global warming, were publishing papers, were going to conferences, and these people didn't hear them. It's not this epic battle of good and evil. It's not this strange desire to avoid this. They are not part of the conversation. They no longer speak the same language. If you Google tonight, go home and Google every chemistry department in the world, Harvard, MIT, here, everywhere, you will find that not one chemistry program on the planet requires a student in chemistry to hear anything that you're talking about. A chemist does not know, if you show a chemist a molecule and say to them, is this molecule toxic? They will say, I don't know. If you say, do you know how to find out? They will say, I don't know. The knowledge is there. Toxicologists know the mechanisms of cancer. Environmental health scientists know the mechanisms of global warming. It's not that the knowledge is unavailable. It is that the conduit does not exist. And so 20 years ago, I wrote this book, came up with this concept called green chemistry with Paul Anastas, that said the first thing that should be taught to a chemist, to someone who is inventing a new material, is the skill to anticipate the potential harm. And still today, no university, it's starting to gain momentum. Now in 2018, finally, universities are starting to realize this. And so there is hope, but we need help. And here's the problem. If a student wakes up someday and says, I want to be a chemist, I want to be an inventor, who are they going to work for? They're probably going to work for the big companies. And those big companies have to meet quarterly reports, and they have to come with these things in a way. They'll be lost in the mass. So our only hope is to use the intelligence in this room to find a new model to support the startups. The young people who want to reject the traditional invention pathway. Because if you think about it, big companies do not really invent anymore. Big companies spend money on R&D because they have to, but almost everything that they actually succeed at, they acquire from some small startup company. Their creativity is coming from the small startup companies. But unlike software, where anyone can hack software and in their basement they can write a computer program, unlike engineering where you can go to a maker space and do a 3D printing of something, there is no easy way to hack chemistry. You need millions of dollars for a laboratory to do the very simplest things in inventing chemistry. You can't just do it in your backyard. You can't just, and so we need to find ways to support the young entrepreneurs who have chosen to learn what makes molecules have impact on the global climate, what makes molecules cause burst effects. There are these people are passionate and they want to learn and they want to know. We have to find a way with policy and with creativity to give those people the knowledge so that they can help us invent the technologies that don't surprise us by the negative impacts. I'm just a simple chemist. I don't know how to help make this happen. But you do. And so if we can find a way to have these students, these 20-year-old students that want to be chemists, that want to do the right thing, that want to invent the right things, we've got to find a way to empower them. And together, let's help them save the world. Thank you.
So, that's an interesting morning breakfast of ideas. And I want to start by thanking you, Wouter, Ugo, and John for these inputs, and begin to allow this process of making connections across these different bodies of ideas to take place. There's something to be said, I think, for what Wouter was bringing up around the secret. There's a secret. And here we have so much effort being put into broadcasting the ideas, get it out there, make it loud, and yet so much success was generated by keeping it a secret and slowing down. This message of slowing down is so anathema to our culture. I would like to take, I think, one question from the room, and then I want to have our coffee quickly because there's a lot of conversation coming in the next sessions, and I really don't want to cut into that time. So, is there any particular, yes?
As always, I will allow myself to be a little bit provocative. A very provocative question. How did it happen that a very famous company involved with chemical weapons during the First World War turned out to genetic engineering? That's a very simple question, but also a little observation. I met somebody who completed a PhD program at a very famous university in genetic engineering. And I asked him, well, are you aware of the fact that, Indian farmers are committing suicides, and that, you can't keep the seeds, even in the United States, and you're being threatened with legal, action and so forth. And I was astonished at what he said. He said, we didn't study any ethics at the University X. So I think it really is connecting really well with what you were saying about the fragmentation in our educational system and the fact that interdisciplinarity is not really encouraged. You have to put your head down and plow the field in your particular area. So, thank you.
Does anybody want to respond to that? Okay. John.
You're absolutely right, and that's the problem. If the majority of people going into the sciences are going to work for the large companies, what's really interesting is that large companies are populated still by people. And the interesting thing that I have observed is that the individual people are aware of the problems, and they don't like the problems, but they've become indoctrinated to, well, I need my job, I need to pay my mortgage, I need to pay my, and so there is this uncomfort, but it's an accepted uncomfort. And I think that the insulation of the large company buffets that because the person next to them is equally uncomfortable, but that has a stabilizing effect that we just collectively agree to accept that discomfort. When a small startup company made of 4 or 5 people are sitting around the table, the voices get louder and the anger gets on. We say, we cannot possibly do this, and they have the ability. And so then if they develop a technology that is consistent, I do believe if the technology works as good and costs appropriate, big companies will acquire it and take it. We will always need policies to support doing the right thing. I believe that we will eternally be, but if the technology is better, if the scientists inventing the technology do a better job, the policy gets a little easier. But if the technology people know nothing, then the policy just gets harder and harder.
And then that's it, we've got to go.
Well, John, thank you. Since I know you since some time, I've heard you speak about more concrete examples. It would be very good to have a few concrete examples, what we're doing today and what could happen with some of your inventions. But more in particular, based on what you just said, how can we change the organization of university education so that this separation between toxicology, ecology on the one hand and chemistry on the other hand, so that it's not sustained forever, but rather it's becoming the opposite. What needs to happen? And how can we, outside the academic world, how can we influence? Because the academic world is like a Babel tower, at least sometimes.
And first, we need to take the time to understand the differences. So what was interesting is that I was a professor of engineering and a professor of chemistry. And to most people, that sounds the same. They are entirely different worlds, okay? An engineer never does an assignment alone. Everything is within teams, and everything is about solving a problem. A chemist never works with anybody else, is always alone, and the goal is to publish a paper. Okay, and so if the engineers are dependent on the chemist to invent, so what we need in the academic model is if you were to ask your typical chemist, and make them take a truth drug, so they must be honest, they are not rewarded for solving problems. They are rewarded for publishing papers. And you would think that's consistent, but it actually isn't consistent. The two are actually, they're at odds with each other. The desire to publish in high impact factor journals, because if I have 22 milligrams of unobtainium that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, I will publish in the most prestigious chemistry journal, but it'll never save anything in the world because it's 22 milligrams of infinitely expensive stuff. If I work with common material that solves these big problems, there is no place for me to be a prestigious chemist. No one wants to publish. If you're working with something that anyone can do, how smart can that be? And so we have the smartest minds in chemistry working in paths that aren't consistent with solving these problems, and so these problems are not discussed with the students. And so we need to change the academic model to have something other than publishing the 3,487th paper in a high impact factor journal. That would change, that would be the first way to change the model.
I think that we should break for coffee now and come back. Our next session is going to be about looking at the way that we think, mindsets and thinking in new ways, which I think is really ties into all of what's being said here, because you could ask, is the problem in academia or is it in the employment sector?
Yeah.
So where is it?
Yeah.
Thank you, and be back by 10:35, okay? 10:35, 10:35.
Your name.